Hello and welcome to the webcast, Engaging Families in Transition Planning. I'm Kelly Lagan, a Research and Demonstration Associate at CTI, the Center on Transition Innovations at VCU. CTI is primarily funded by the Virginia Department of Education as the state's online portal for all things related to secondary transition, including webcasts, free online courses for students and families and practitioners, as well as multiple publications related to employment, post-secondary education and training, and independent living. To find these and more, go to our website, www.centerontransition.org. Now, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce the speaker for today's webcast, Tammy Burns, a parent and also the project manager for PEATC, Parent Education Advocacy Training Center here in Virginia. Tammy received her BA from Virginia Tech in elementary education and began her career as an elementary school teacher in Chesterfield County. She attended many IEP meetings as a teacher, but then in 2000, when her middle son, Jared, was diagnosed with autism, Tammy experienced IEP meetings from the other side of the table. Because of this, Tammy decided to pursue her Master of Education in Curriculum and Instruction with a concentration in autism spectrum disorders from Arizona State. Tammy also graduated from Virginia's Partners in Policymaking program, where she developed a very successful IEP bootcamp for parents as her culminating project. Tammy is passionate about empowering individuals with disabilities and their parents and guardians with the knowledge and tools that they need as they transition to adulthood. Tammy, thanks for addressing this very important topic.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thanks for having me here today. I appreciate having the opportunity to share. So let's go ahead and just get started here. I thought I would start, as Kelly has introduced me a little bit, and thought I would start just by sharing a little bit of my own family story, because it has become so much of my own story and in my work with families around Virginia. As Kelly shared, I have 3 children. I still call them my children, but they're all adults now. And my middle son, Jared, has autism. He has pretty significant support needs his autism creates for him. Jared was diagnosed a long time ago with autism back when he was 18 months old. And now just here in a few more days, he's going to turn 24. So I've been learning about autism and about Jared for quite a while. I still remember Jared's very first IEP meeting and sitting there and trying to take all of that in. And since that time, he has had multiple IEP meetings, as you can imagine. Jared is a unique individual, and as everybody is, and he marches to the beat of his own drum. As you can see here in this picture, this is when Jared was at his 5th grade graduation event. And you can see that all the kids around Jared, for the most part, are sitting down, but not Jared. He attended it in his own way. Like I said, he marches to the beat of his own drum. By the time we left elementary school, which is when this photo was taken, I had a pretty good grasp of Jared's strengths and needs. At that point, I knew who he was and what supports at that moment that he was going to be needing. But I knew there needed to be something different and some kind of different plan. So our family at the end of 5th grade decided to actually sit down as a family and put together a written plan for what we envisioned Jared's future to look like. We put together our own vision for his future. It was important for us that when Jared left high school, that he was prepared to be employed. We knew it was going to take a lot of work by Jared, a lot of work by us as his family, and a lot of work by professionals that supported him to make that vision a reality. Along the way from then until now, we've been very fortunate. We've had some IEP team members who took the time to understand the vision and dreams that we had for Jared and let that drive our IEPs during that transition to adulthood years. You know, here in Virginia, that's 14 and up. And also some great service, community service providers who listened to our thoughts and our dreams and Jared's thoughts and dreams as to what he wanted for life after high school. And all of that, by the time Jared was in high school, I can say I felt that we were truly engaged in that transition planning process for him. You can see here, I'll show you a few more images really quickly. As we, as I said, as the teams that he was with, we worked together for one common goal, which was getting Jared ready for employment. You can see in these images just a small number of Jared's transition planning in action. He had some internships, like the one at CVS, where he learned things, different job activities, and also where the team really used that to assess his different job skills in that place. He had community-based instruction, like at Positive Vibe Cafe. And even his after-school activities, like managing the football team, became a place where IEP goals and employment goals were worked on. Things like communication and following a list and skills of that nature. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy, because it was not. It took work from everyone and a lot of time. But for Jared, it made a huge difference. And I'm going to come back around to that as we go through this webcast. But for today, here are the objectives that we're going to have for today's webcast. I'm going to define family engagement versus family involvement. We're going to discuss the impact of family engagement on student outcomes, and then describe the benefits for engaging families, students and parents in transition planning. I'm going to start with looking at the difference between family engagement and family involvement. We hear these words very often in the educational and disability services world. They are words that you have heard, I'm sure. I thought it would be good to define those and describe how those two phrases, family engagement, family involvement, are different. So family involvement is where the family is participating in their child's education. They are involved. They may be involved merely because they were instructed by the education establishment or the provider to do so. It's where the family is really involved. They're taking part in an activity, but that activity was already determined by the school or by the provider. It was already determined by somebody else. It's where someone else, some other organization, has identified and planned the activity. So some examples of that might be you get a letter, a parent gets a letter from school saying we need some volunteers to come in and cut out things for the class, or to volunteer to send in cookies for an event we're going to have, chaperoning school events, signing papers and forms when they come to you in a timely manner, communicating back and forth, attending meetings, attending parent-teacher conferences. It's showing up, it's being involved. Parent engagement is different. It takes that involvement one step further. Family engagement involves some active and meaningful participation where the family is actually part of the decision-making process. That's where it's different. Some examples of that would be, let's say a school is just trying to decide what kind of programs and activities to have for the year, and they actually involve families in deciding what those programs are and in planning those programs around the needs that the families are expressing. In meetings, it can involve things like being a part of the decision-making process in an IEP, or being a part in the decision-making process in a community support type meeting around vocational rehabilitation, or around waiver supports or something of that nature. But it's playing an active role in the decision-making. That is what we mean when we say family engagement. That type of family engagement, where that family is engaged in the decision-making process and has that active part, creates better outcomes for students. And a lot of times, I know for my own family, I was really involved and partly engaged, I will say, when my children were younger. There were lots of opportunities presented to me to be a part of their schooling. But as they aged, I felt like personally that those opportunities may not have been, or maybe I didn't notice them, did not seem like there were as many. So what about when children are reaching that transition age, 14 and up? Does family engagement really matter at that stage of the game? I mean, the child has already finished a majority of their schooling. Research says yes, it does. Research has shown that family engagement is a greater predictor of successful outcomes for youth than income or social status. Here's just a few things we know from research. Students with one or more parents who participated in IEP meetings during the 11th and 12th grade years were more likely to be engaged in post-school employment. Students with parents who had high expectations were more likely to be engaged in post-secondary education and employment. And we know that from research that when families remain involved in their children's middle school and high school education, students are more likely to attend school regularly, have a positive attitude about school, earn higher grades, score higher on standardized tests, more likely to graduate from high school, and more likely to enroll in post-secondary programs. Those successes matter in the long run. We all know that family involvement, that involvement we talked about in transition planning, is required by IDEA, special education law. But stepping past involvement and actively engaging families, doing that family engagement side of things, can be essential for best outcomes. So let's talk about the family's role in the transition process. In other words, what can families bring to the table? Why do we need them engaged? We know it brings better outcomes, but what does that look like? First of all, I want to say here's some things that that families bring to the table. Parents know their children best. Why are families and parents important? Because they have that history to carry forward into adulthood. They have been parenting this child for X number of years, and they have been a member of every IEP meeting since the beginning. They are the consistent person. The family, the student, and the parent or guardian are the consistent people involved in every planning meeting. They know what's worked. They know what hasn't worked. They know about their child's whole life, not just a slice of it. They truly have the big picture view. Experts on human development consider that late adolescence a launching period when families help youth develop skills that they need as adults. When parental roles change and that young person is leaving high school and reaches the age of adulthood, families don't just disappear. Families are still there, and they will be there throughout that person's life. As I said, families have been there and they're going to be there. I remind families that they are the constants in all meetings, in IEPs and IPEs, whatever it might be. Transition coordinators, teachers, case managers, they come and go depending on the school, depending on the time, depending on their own personal schedule, they come and go. But the families and the students are those consistent people. It is important to know, as we're talking about, families being consistent and being there, that families vary in their capacity to support their child at a given time. Family engagement looks different for different families and for different times in a person's life because of the current issues they may face. For my own family, we often had times where maybe Jared was having some behavioral pieces that we needed to work on, or we were really struggling with a specific thing at home or medically. And because of that, in those times, it may have looked from the outside looking in that I was maybe not as engaged as I should be. It is important to remember that families have different capacities for engagement at different times. Families also bring knowledge to the table. They bring knowledge of their own family's values and their cultural beliefs. That information is invaluable when transition planning. It plays a huge part in what someone's life after high school, life as a young adult might look like. And it's so important to utilize that type of engagement from families to learn about those values and cultural beliefs that they bring to the table. Families are the keeper of high expectations. Those expectations build upon that young person's strengths and their interests and needs. And because of that, they can support and guide their children to make informed choices and decisions. We all want that student to be making those informed choices and decisions. We want them to be a self-advocate. Families help that move forward. Students begin to take on more and more responsibility, and parents have to figure out that way to support them. And because of that, as I said, parents have a natural reason to be motivated to encourage their students in self-advocacy. So bringing those families along engaging them in that process will actually help encourage self-advocacy in the student. So what about in my own experience? What were the benefits, and did it really matter? Going back to my story for just a minute, I told you that we had a dream long ago for Jared to become employed. And that dream, because of a hardworking team engaging my family, became a reality. In Jared's 4th year of high school, he began working 10 hours a week at our local Gold's Gym. He fell in love with managing sports teams back in high school. And the day he walked into Gold's Gym with his job coach for an interview, he said, "This is like my gym at Cosby." He wanted to work there. He gradually moved to working 20 hours a week, and he would go to school in the afternoon and go to work in the morning. And we continued to actively engage with his school team and his adult provider team, his job support, his waiver case manager, to make this all possible. Jared held that job at Gold's Gym for 4+ years. And at that point, our family ended up moving out of the area. Gold's Gym was not so happy that he was leaving because he had become a part of their family at that point. But Jared brought with him to our new area all of the employment skills and background that he had gained. And we knew as a family how important it was going to be to engage quickly with adult service providers because we had seen the outcomes that had brought. It did not take long for us to find a job that Jared is now loving. He works for a local vacation rental company, actually, and inspects vacation homes and stocks them with items for guests prior to the arrival. It takes a team. It has not been easy, but he continues to be employed because of family engagement. So I want to spend the rest of our time today talking about ways, tips for providers and ways you can encourage families to be engaged in the transition process. To start with, I would say one of the most important things is for providers, educational or community support providers to understand families. We all know, as we've talked about, that family engagement is important, but it is key to understand where transition parents are, not physically, like where are they sitting, but where are they emotionally and capacity-wise? Because where families are can affect their capacity to engage in these later years. At my job at PEATC, I talk to parents daily, parents from around the state of Virginia. And there's some specific things that I have learned about where they are. And I thought that would be important to share. First of all, a lot of parents, when they tell me about talking about their child's life after high school, tell me that they are in some way, shape, or form afraid of the future. They know that they're getting older. They know their student is getting older. And they're afraid, what is going to happen when we no longer have school services? What is going to happen as I age? What will happen if something happens to me? Those thoughts wrap around a family in those high school years, especially hard. And so it is important to understand that when a family comes to a meeting or an event and they're trying to engage, that sometimes those thoughts about that fear for the future are actually driving almost everything that they say and that they do at that moment. So understanding where parents are, where they might be, is super important. They could be a lot of times, it doesn't come out as, hey, I'm afraid of the future, but it comes out as anxiety around what ifs. And I don't know about that. Can you tell me more about that fear of the unknown? And then families oftentimes have grown, when you have a child with a disability, you have grown with them in the way of always trying to protect them and make sure that they're okay. And as their child is becoming less of a child and more of an adult, it can be difficult to bridge that and to let some things go in order to let your child experience employment or community involvement. And so knowing that may be a hesitation that they have as well. Parents often, another thing to understand is they're very, in this stage of life, transition parents, I'd call them, are often overwhelmed with trying to just understand the different systems. I mean, you as a professional probably feel some of that same thing. For example, with Jared, he had, I had a pretty strong understanding of the IEP process when he was in elementary school. Finally, I'd been at IEP meetings, and then I really began to grasp how this was all working. And then suddenly at 14, we began talking about different things, and I had to relearn and learn new information to be an active, engaged person in that meeting. And then I had to learn all kinds of other systems outside of the school system. And each one of those systems has their own processes, their own rules, their own eligibility requirements, their own people you need to talk to. There is no one person who says, hey, I'm going to manage all these things for you. And in fact, that becomes the parent most of the time. So instead of working with just one team, I found myself working with the school team and a VR team and a CSB team, a Social Security Administration, and more. And that can be overwhelming to just have that in your life, have all those meetings, but then to try to be an actively engaged person. And then that kind of all builds into that fear that we talked about earlier. And then it's important to understand that many families during this transition time are finding it tough to move from being advocate for being the advocate for their child to being the advisor. As I said, we've taken care of, we've protected our child, and it can be difficult to think of not doing that and letting them go or fail. It's just one of those things, and it happens with children without disabilities too, but there's just an added amount of that families with children with disabilities face. And then, just to be honest, at that point in time, many families are just tired. We have been navigating service systems for years. And because Jared started an early intervention when he was 9 months old, we have been navigating service systems since that point. And there is no end to that. It continues throughout his life. So by the time he reached high school, I had been navigating just special ed for 12 years. And 12 years of facing autism and how it affected my son, at times I was just tired, and that made it difficult to engage. So understanding where parents are can certainly help you as you work to engage them. And then take that understanding and support them where they are, providing multiple opportunities for engagement and a variety of ways for them to engage. Remember, just as students are unique, so are families. They need a variety of options and ways to engage, and at variety of times in their lives, because sometimes it just may not be the time to be engaged. Give them sufficient notice for any type of paperwork or meetings. Life is busy. Everybody's life is busy. And there's lots involved to having a youth with disabilities. Give them that advance notice. Hey, we're going to be having a meeting next month, so let's look at the calendar now. We're going to need this paper filled out. Don't say, here it is, and I need it tomorrow. If you want them really engaged in that decision-making process, give them some of that advance notice. Converse with families. Don't talk to or at, talk with. Make sure they are listened to. That includes the student and the families, parents and guardians. Make sure they're listened to, but more importantly, make sure they feel listened to. Make sure they know that you want their input, that you want them involved in this decision. And then empower families with knowledge. It is key that information given to families, they're looking for information. That information given to them is presented in a very clear and understandable way. We, in the disability services world and in the school world, have our own language. We speak in educational and service acronyms and words, but a lot of families don't know what those mean and don't want to seem like they don't know. And so they sometimes will not ask. Providing information to families in a way they can understand them. And if their native language is not English, making sure that things are given to them in a language they can understand. Give them the tools that they can use in short, bite-sized pieces. Will empower them to become engaged and to be an active participant in all of these decision-making processes. And with that, I will say, when you're doing all of those things and giving them that information, it is also important not to tell families what they have to do. Too often families call and say to me, hey, I talked to so-and-so and they said we have to blank, fill it in. Because my child is becoming an adult, we have to blank. Give them options, let them know the choices that are there, but let them be the ones making the decision, not telling them what they have to do, but here are some options that you may want to look at. When these things happen, when you understand and you support and you converse and you empower, that team builds trust. The team as a whole, whatever service or school you're working in, that whole team, family, student, and all of the professionals build trust. And that is when everyone can truly engage. It takes an effort from everyone, but that effort is absolutely worth the outcomes that will happen.
Thank you, Tammy, for your insight as a parent and professional, as well as your recommendations to engage families in the transition planning process. This webcast, as well as a fast fact on this topic, is available on CTI's website, www.centerontransition.org. You can also connect with CTI through social media channels like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks again for tuning in.